In the previous episode, we abstracted away the configuration into a config.php. This was an associative array with a database, for the first array being the database settings having associations of host, port, DB name. Then we used a variable config to require the php.config and then passed it to the database. And again, for while creating a new database object from the database class, we just needed the config db settings over here. So that's what we imported into this. We also refactored database to accept configuration at the time of construction. So whenever the class is instantiated, meaning when we create an object called db based on the class database, we pass in the configuration and we fetch we create a new connection. So connection was a global variable, and then when we want to fetch a query, then we run the function query on the db object, which you see done over here. See? Okay, so that was in a nutshell what we did in our previous episode. Now Jeffrey is going to walk us through SQL injection vulnerabilities. Let's watch and learn.
All right, next up, we should discuss SQL injection as well as, in general, improper SQL query formatting and the dangers associated with it. Okay, so in the US legal system, we have this ideal that a person is innocent until proven guilty, right? Well, as it turns out, on the web and in the programming world, actually the opposite is true. We should always assume that the user is guilty, not innocent. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's open up Table Plus, and I will visit my SQL tab. And yeah, a quick refresher. Let's grab everything from the post table, or we can grab the post with an ID of 2, where ID equals 2. And as it turns out, we can also use the OR keyword. So maybe I could say, give me the post where the ID equals 1 or 2. And there we go. Or if we want to be a little more verbose, we could say where the ID equals 1 or the ID equals 2. And we'll get the same thing. But what if we instead applied that to a different table? So you can see behind the scenes, I've quickly whipped up a users table where the username is varchar of 100 characters and the admin is a Boolean, or a tiny integer of 2 characters, where 0 is false and 1 is true. Okay, so if we take a look at the data, I have 2 administrators and 1 guest. So if I switch back to my SQL query tab, let's select star from users. All right. Now let's find John, where the ID is 2. Or let's find John and any administrators, like this, where ID equals 2 or admin equals 1. Okay, so now, yes, we have John Doe, but we've also retrieved every administrator from the system. And then finally, if we wanted to, we could delete the entire users table by saying drop table and then the name of the users table. So real quick, before I execute this, let's go here into structure, into info, and here is the query that I can run to regenerate the table. So I will copy that just so I can quickly recreate it. Okay, so I will hit Command Return. And now if I refresh with Command R, sure enough, we've deleted that users table.
So funny incidents, drop table is SQL. So you see here, drop table users. Is obviously an SQL query wherein you delete the entire table. Like I said in the previous video, dropping means deleting in this sense. What happened once was someone tried to name their kid in the US. They tried to name their kid drop table so that whenever he would register for a site, or whenever the census came in to basically to count the population of the USA, mark his birth certificate, I guess. Whenever he was entered into the system, it would be drop table something. So if the government website was not SQL sanitized, which means not protected against this edge case, then they would essentially delete the entire table where he would be stored. That actually happened. Someone did try to name their kid drop table. That's the most chaotic evil thing that I've heard on the internet, at least in a while. Thought I would share.
And now if I refresh with Command R, sure enough, we've deleted that users table.
Also, on a similar note, sorry I'm pausing again, someone got a license plate number called drop table. So whenever speed cameras, so drop table some digits or something. So whenever speed cameras would catch that, catch the license plate and try to feed it into their database, it would essentially result in some sort of SQL query injection if it wasn't sanitized properly. So I'm glad we're learning how to avoid these situations, because there are malicious trolls out there who do this, who go to extreme lengths to just ruin your database. So let Jeffrey teach us how to protect our app from this attack.
It's entirely gone. Okay. So I will paste in that create query, and now it's back. All right, cool. So now let's take everything we've learned just now and figure out how it might be used against us. All right, so back to PHP Storm. And at the moment, we're just selecting everything from the post table, and then we dump the results. So back to Firefox, give it a refresh, and sure enough, I get an array of 2 posts. But now let's switch it to the post with the ID of 1. And sure enough, we get a single record. And in this case, of course, if we're only getting 1 record, we can stick with fetch. I don't need a list or a collection. I just need a single result. Okay, but now, as you can imagine in real life, we won't be hard coding the ID. Instead, for example, the user will click on a post with an ID of 1, or another post with an ID of 2. And maybe we could pass that through using the query string, like this, ID equals 1. Okay, and now, of course, we're not yet doing anything with that parameter, so that's the next step. And as it turns out, we can access that query string by using the $_get superglobal. So why don't we pass that to DD? And real quick, if this is confusing, well, remember in the router episode, we reviewed superglobals right here.
Yeah.
So the first one was server to grab information about the request in the server. This time, we're using get to access information about the get request. Okay, so if I come back to Firefox and I give it a refresh, sure enough, I now have an array of all query string parameters. Okay, so now if I want to grab the ID, I can access it like this. Cool. So now you're probably thinking, great, why don't we save this or cache it to a variable, and then we will inline it here. All right, switch back, refresh, and yeah, there's the post with an ID of 1. And here's the post with an ID of 2. So yeah, it works, ... So your instinct might be to pat yourself on the back and say, good job, me.
No, pause. Let me show you why this is a bad idea. Multiple reasons, I'm sure there are alarm bells going on in your head as well as you're watching this. But let's say post ID equals the _get. By the way, this corresponds to get request. Okay, so you remember I told you about we discussed about HTTP methods, get, put, post, etc. So get is essentially that. I'm sure there's an underscore post as well. Let's say g equals _post. Sorry, $_post. Oh, cool. There's cookies. See, there's post, I told you. Request, files, post. So let's not go there, but back on topic, he said post where, I think, how do you get the URL parameters? ID, yeah. Okay, cool. How about I say foo over here, and let me dd post ID. Okay. Okay, so there's nothing. Foo equals bar. Wait, there's nothing yet. Am I running the server? Index to PHP line 17. Post ID equals get foo. ID equals get ID. Okay. Let's see where we're going wrong. Let's just say ID over here, and ID equals interesting. If I don't have any, nah. Okay. Why is this not underlining? It should. Okay, null because it's undefined. How about I do this? Let's just call it ID. Okay. So what is happening here? ID equals get ID. I'm sorry, this is not a method, it's actually an array. Sorry about that. It's the little things in programming. Aren't you die dumping? Oh yeah, die, it's null. It should probably die here, but it's not dying, so that's fine. Let me just say ID equals 1. I'm sorry, I need to do a question mark here. Yeah, okay, cool. This will probably work if I just do foo as well. And I'll just say foo equals bar. Yeah. How about something that doesn't? It should be null. Okay, cool. So now that I have this, let me where ID equals ID. ID equals ID. I'm not gonna fetch all, instead I'm gonna fetch. Okay, because there's no, see, this is what, yeah. Welcome to my blog. Since it's not a this thing, this won't work. This probably won't work because it's not a associative array, or I want to say, you know, it's not like a sub array, it's just a single thing. You know what I'm saying, right? This is just one post, so this won't be post title, it won't be for each because there's just one. I can instead just echo post title, posts title, if you just want to see this. Okay, now see this. See? Okay, I'm not gonna fix this, instead I'll just comment this out. So we understood what's happening here, right? We're getting a URL parameter from the get method, which is built into PHP. URL parameter is ID equals, so URL parameter is anything after the question mark. Here ID is 1, so we're getting select everything from post where ID is 1. But if it doesn't exist, of course it's not going to give me a 404, instead it's going to give me an error, a blank page, because, well, there's no such thing, there's no post here. Can I say id equals drop table, am I gonna? Okay, let me not. Let's see.
All right, switch back, refresh, and yeah, there's the post with an ID of 1. And here's the post with an ID of 2.
So select this and drop table. It should be something like, I'm not going to pass that, so id equals 1 and drop table. I think it's %20. %20. That's how you express spaces in URLs, but obviously I'm not going to press enter. Let's see.
So yeah, it works, ... So your instinct might be to pat yourself on the back and say, good job, me. But actually, no, we've introduced a major vulnerability here. All right, so here's the problem. We are taking whatever the user types into that query string for the ID parameter, and we are inlining it as part of the SQL query. So let's do this. Let's take everything here and extract it into a variable called query. And then I will save that like so. That way I can very quickly die and dump the query before we execute it. All right, I think this will help. So if I come back and refresh, this is the query that we will ultimately execute against our database. Okay, no problem. But what if I changed it to, as we reviewed, 1 or 2? And yeah, that's a valid query, isn't it? So think about it. This is a small little tweak that the user made, but it illustrates a gigantic security threat in your application. So let's review another example. What if I said, give me the post with an ID of 1, and then we'll add a semicolon here, and I will say drop table users. All right, we're getting a little sneaky here, aren't we? We are now triggering 2 queries. One to fetch the post with an ID of 1, and then another that we definitely didn't intend to drop the users table entirely. So let's give it a shot. I will remove that DD, and now we will trigger and execute that query. So back to Firefox, give it a refresh, and yes, we have the results. But now, if I come back to Table Plus and I refresh with Command R, pay attention right here, 3, 2, 1, goodbye users table. And now think about it. With
oh my god, owned. Oh my god, it is so entertaining watching this happen in real time. To think, not that long ago, about, I want to say like 20-ish years ago, this was actually how you would destroy a multi-million-dollar corporation. It was that simple. Before, even honestly, I won't be surprised if there are still huge businesses which have SQL injection vulnerabilities, because technology doesn't, uptake of technology isn't universal, so, or there's always people who would leave this backdoor open, who would have unknowns, knowledge gaps. Holy cow. Man, it is so mind-blowing watching this happen in real time. It was that just enter a sequence of characters in the URL and you can destroy a business. Wow.
Without our permission, an annoying, malicious, mean-spirited person was able to delete every single user in our database.
Insane.
And do I have to say it? That's really not good.
Yeah.
Okay, but luckily, there is a fairly simple solution these days. Okay, so I have a rule for you here that I'd love for you to follow. And in general, you may have noticed this, I'm not the biggest fan of programming rules, as if they are, commandments from above that shall not be broken. But in this case, it kind of is a commandment. You need to follow this one. Okay, so when accepting user input through a query string or through a form, never, ever inline it as part of a SQL query. That's what allows for SQL injection, especially if you haven't formatted your query properly, which usually people don't. Okay, so here's the solution. I'm no longer going to inline it directly. Instead, and I'll show you 2 ways to format this, I will replace it with a
I bet there's a built-in PHP function to solve for this.
question mark. Select star from post where the ID is something. something that later we will associate or bind to the query. But here's the key thing to understand. The query and the bound parameters almost travel in two different boats. Maybe that's a way to think of it. You will send through the query to MySQL, and then in a separate boat, you will send through the parameters. And when you take this approach, you remove any possibility of improper formatting or SQL injection. Okay, so now, how do I bind the parameters? Well, actually, let's do this. I'm going to open up a split, visit our database class that we worked on, and yeah, right here, when we call the execute method, this is where you can bind the parameters, and it will take the form of an array. But in this case, well, I need to pass them through here, so it sounds like this array should be dynamic. Why don't we call it params, and then I will accept it as part of the method signature. And we'll default that to an empty array. Okay, so now, when I call the query method as the second parameter, I can bind my ID, like this. All right, cross your fingers, switch back, and let's start with the happy path. Give it a run, and yeah, it works. Let's switch to the ID of 2. And that works as well. Now let's try something malicious. So if I switch back, I don't have my users table anymore. Real quick, let's go to the SQL tab. And here's my SQL query to recreate it. All right, run it. Give it a refresh, and now it's back. And yeah, let's try to drop that table again. Give me the post where the ID is 2, semicolon, and then drop table users. Okay, so with any luck, if I switch back and refresh, the users table is still intact. And it's intact specifically because we leveraged prepared statements with bound parameters. So just to be crystal clear, if I brought this back to what we had before, well, now we are once again inlining the variable. So we run it, and bada bing, bada boom, your users table is now gone. And this is the whole point of the video. This is the main thing I want you to avoid. Never, ever, ever inline user data into a query string. So I will bring this back, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna note that down. SQL. Never pass user input into SQL query string. Wow.
This is a significantly safer approach. Okay, so finally, to wrap up, I did note that there were 2 ways to declare this.
Yeah.
First, I could use a question mark, which is fine, or I could use a key. We begin it with a colon, and then we give it any name we want. In this case, ID would make sense. Okay, so now the only difference is I pass an associative array, where I reference the key and then the value. And if you want, it can be colon at the beginning or no colon. It's entirely optional, whatever you think reads best.
Okay.
So once again, if I come back and refresh, and as expected, we get the exact same thing. So yeah, whether you reach for a question mark or these, I don't know what the name is, keyed wildcard parameters, something like that, it doesn't really matter. Choose the one that you like best. But the whole point and intention of this video, and I'll drill it into your head one more time, is to never, ever, 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 ever accept user input and inline it as part of a database query. You don't want to do it.
Yeah. Okay, amazing, fantastic lecture, fantastic, superb lesson. Okay, let's try and implement this. So he changed the statement to execute a query string and a parameter. So I believe it was here. I'm going to just double check this. Yeah, so it was in the query. I'm gonna call this param and have this be passed on as well. Okay, in my index.php, instead of this, I'm gonna say id equals question mark and pass in a param for id. Okay, this may work. Query and then id. So all he did was he moved the query into a different variable, which I'm not really doing. I know why he did that, just to like show us what the query was. Basically, he wanted to die dump it, or dump die it, but I'm not going to do that. This is simple. I think it'll achieve the same effect. Oh, I do know it doesn't. Okay, select everything from post, where post id is this, id equals 1. Okay, why does it not do that? I want to go where he split screen this. There was, yeah, this one, database.php. Oh yeah, params need to be Jesus, associative array. Right, and it needs to be passed in the execute, not here. Sorry, I thought it was gonna be here. Params need to be an array, which is fine, it should be an array. And they need to be passed while executing, not while preparing the statement. Okay. Now it should work. Should it? I guess it should. Okay, what's wrong? Param equals this is fine. Param is this, params. Oh yeah, it could be multiple, so I'll just change this and return the statement. That's fine. Okay, this looks good. Then why is this not working? Query is expecting 2 arguments. Yes, query string and param. Param is this. Is this an array or what is this? No, it's an integer, so I have to put this in square brackets. Will this work? Yeah, it did. Did he put it in square brackets? I don't think he did.
Okay, so now here now. Okay, sure, because we leveraged prepared table, so and this is ever inline user data into to B. We begin it with a colon.
He did. Excuse me. He did put this in square brackets. Cool. So this is my first post. This is my second post. I'm going to trust that it works because I don't have a users table right now to test it. Cool. So let me give you a recap of super important. First, let me check if there's homework. No, there's no homework. It was super interesting, man. Very important thing to know. It blows my mind. I still like have just like I'm flabbergasted thinking about how easy it used to be to take down internet business by performing an SQL injection attack. It's not just people would think to sanitize their forms, meaning make sure there isn't anything funky happening in any user input form, and then they would forget to sanitize the URL parameters, which is what I'm glad Jeffrey taught us how to do that first to start off with. So let me walk you through what's happening here. We are getting the ID and assuming that the ID corresponds to the post that we want to show. It's fairly common practice. And to get that post, we are essentially storing that ID in a as a parameter rather than passing it as a raw SQL query. So to do that, there's two things happening parallelly. One is we're preparing the query, which is essentially this. The other thing is we are accepting the ID and storing that as a parameter and passing that parameter separately after preparing the query string. So we're executing it with the param over here, passing that array, fetching the data, and echoing out the result from the post, which would be an array. So this array would have ID and title. We're echoing out the title. Wow, I hope you've had fun, hope you've learned something, hope you've enjoyed this. And that is the end of chapter 2, Dynamic Web Applications. Thank you so much for learning this with me. Thanks to Jeffrey Wave for creating one of the best PHP tutorials out there. If you'd like to check it out, please go to the link in the description, and it's for free. You don't even have to sign up. And the other thing is he's also posted the whole video on YouTube. It's almost 11 hours long, so the links to both of those options are in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and you take care. I'll catch you again next time. Bye.